How do you become a stranger at a house you built with your own 2 hands? Mine took about 40 minutes. My nephew raised a glass at his engagement party, called me the man who likes being near the family, and put an apron in my hands in front of 40 people while the bride's parents looked at their shoes. I am 63. I taught that boy to back a boat trailer down the Caldwell dock before he could spell his own name. I did not shout. I set the tray down, I carried the chairs he asked me to carry, and I waited, because there was one person Trent forgot to put on the guest list, the same person my father told me to call the day anyone ever stood up in that house and said I didn't belong in it. By the end of the night, a quiet man in a gray coat would walk through that door with a folder, and Trent would learn what every Caldwell at that table already half knew and chose to forget: whose name is actually on the deed to the lake. Who the man in the gray coat was, I'll come to later. Here is the only thing to carry into the rest of it. I never once raised my voice, and I never had to. Let me back up to the part before the apron. The lake house sits at the end of a gravel road that floods every March, and for 30 years I was the one who walked out in the dark to lift the dock sections before the water took them. My father, Walt, bought the property when I was a boy. He paid it off slow, the way he did everything, and somewhere along the way it stopped being a thing he owned and started being the thing the whole family stood on top of. Birthdays, funerals, the 4th of July every year, with the same scorched grill and the same argument about who burned the corn. I slept on a cot in the back room more nights than I slept in my own bed in town. A cot, a window that didn't latch, and a battered green tackle box of my father's that I carried out to the boat every morning the way some men carry a thermos. None of that is a complaint, and I want that clear early, because the rest of this is going to sound like one, and it isn't. I loved that house. I was the one who kept it standing. Those are 2 separate facts, and only one of them turned out to matter to the people inside it. Trent is my late brother's older boy. He is 31 now, and he was the kind of child you forgive on instinct before you've decided what for. Golden, people called him. His mother's easy face and a way of making a room lean toward him. I taught him to drive the boat when he was 9 and to back the trailer down the ramp when he was 12, both of us soaked to the knees, his mother watching from a folding chair on the bank with her arms crossed against the wind. When his father died, I was the one who drove 4 hours in the rain to sit with him in a hospital hallway and tell him it was all right to cry where nobody could see. So when his engagement party landed at the lake house, the house I'd kept running for him to have a party in, I drove out a day early to help. I bailed the rain out of the boat. I lifted the dock sections that had floated loose. I set the green tackle box on the boat seat where it lives. And I went up to hang strings of lights, because I assumed, the way you assume the floor will hold, that I'd been invited. I had not been invited. I had been scheduled. Marcus told me, and he told me the way you tell a man his car's been towed. Fast, not looking right at him. Marcus is Trent's younger brother, 28, the one nobody describes when they describe the Caldwell boys. Quieter. Watches more than he talks. He found me on the dock with a coil of light cord in my hands and a clothespin in my teeth.
Uncle Cal, Trent wants the folding chairs set up by 4. The good ones from the boathouse, not the rusted ones. He said to tell you.
I took the clothespin out of my mouth. He said to tell me, I repeated.
Yeah.
Like a list.
He's got a list, Marcus said, and then he looked at the water instead of at me, which is how I knew there was more on the list than chairs. I'm on it too. We're doing the chairs together.
He put you on a list, I said.
He put us both on a list. Marcus almost smiled. It wasn't a happy almost smile. Chairs by 4. Ice by 4:30. Cal and Marcus, the setup. That's what it says. He typed it up.
He typed it up, I said.
On his phone. Showed it to me like it was nothing. Marcus shrugged, but the shrug didn't reach his eyes. I've been on Trent's lists my whole life, Uncle Cal. I figured you'd want a heads up before you found out the way I always do. From the list.
I want you to sit with that because I did. Marcus is a grown man with a job and a truck and a name on his own lease, and Trent had put the two of us, the uncle who raised him and the brother who grew up beside him, on a typed list under the heading of furniture. I didn't say that out loud. He hadn't written the list. He was just delivering it, and I could see in the set of his shoulders that he knew exactly how it sounded and had decided to tell me anyway. That was the first small thing he ever did on my side. For now, I just nodded. "Then let's set up chairs," I said. We carried them two at a time up from the boathouse, the good white folding chairs Walt bought one fall on clearance that the family had been parking themselves on ever since. 40, give or take. Somewhere around the 20th chair, I noticed the catering van, the rented arch by the water, a woman with a clipboard pointing at things, and I understood this was not the kind of party where the uncle hangs the lights and gets clapped on the back. This was a production. Somebody was being sold something here, and it wasn't the cake. The bride is a young woman named Savannah. I'd met her twice. Soft-spoken, watchful in a way I liked. The daughter of people with money the family had been very careful to mention to me, more than once, as if the amount were a fact about Trent. Her father, Mr. Rhodes, arrived at 3:30 in a linen jacket and shook my hand on the lawn before he knew which Caldwell I was. Good handshake. Mr. Rhodes. "Beautiful spot," he said, looking out at the water. "Really something. Been in the family a while?" "Long while," I said. Mr. Rhodes. "Trent tells me it goes back to the grandfather. Tells me it'll be theirs someday. His and Savannah's." He smiled, pleased, the smile of a man who has been told a thing he wanted to hear and has decided to believe it. Generations on the same water. You don't see that anymore. And you're... what? You help out around the place? "I keep the lake running," I said. Mr. Rhodes. "Good, good. Place like this needs a man who knows it." He clapped my arm and moved off toward the arch, having filed me, in one clean motion, under the heading where you keep the man who knows the place but doesn't own it. I didn't correct him. I had no idea yet how much that small filing would cost everyone, or that what Trent had told him about generations on the same water was, on paper, exactly backward. By 4 the chairs were in rows and the guests arriving, and I went to find my place. There were place cards on the long table, little folded tents of cream cardstock with names in gold. I'm not a man who needs his name in gold, but I looked for it, the way you look, and found it at the far end, near the kitchen door, at the table where the children sat. My name, Cal, slid down to the kids' table. I stood there holding it. A boy of about 7 was already in the next chair, kicking the table leg. Across the lawn, I could see the head table, the family table, and the seat that should have been mine. I counted. There wasn't one. That's the kind of thing a man can tell himself is an accident, a caterer's mistake. Too many cousins. Not enough cardstock. I am 63, and I've spent a lot of my life giving people the benefit of a doubt I knew. Even then, they hadn't earned. So I told myself it's a mistake. I'll sit by the kitchen. The food's closer anyway. And I sat down at the children's table at the engagement party in the house I'd kept standing for 30 years, put the gold card in my shirt pocket, and waited to be wrong about what was happening. Aunt Lorna made sure I wasn't wrong. Lorna is married to one of Walt's cousins, a woman who has spent decades arranging other people's seating in her head. She came by with a glass of white wine and patted my shoulder like I was a dog that had wandered into a nice room.
"Oh, Cal, look at you, right in the thick of it," she said. "You always did just like being near the family, didn't you? Near all the fun."
"I like the lake," I said.
"Of course you do." She leaned in, lowering her voice to the volume people use when they want to be overheard. "And it's so good of Trent to keep you around. Some families wouldn't, you know, with everything."
"With everything," I said.
"Well, you know, a man on his own, no family of his own, no place of his own, And here's this lake, and here's all of us." She waved her wine at the lawn, at the lights, at the rented arch. "It's natural you'd want to be where the warmth is. Nobody blames you for it. I just think it's lovely Trent makes room."
Trent makes room, I said.
"He does. He's got a generous heart, that boy. Always did." She patted my shoulder a second time, the dog in a nice room pat. "You sit right here where it's comfortable, Cal. The little ones love you. You're good with the little ones."
I'm good with the little ones, I said, because I'd discovered that if I just handed her own sentences back to her, she kept talking, and the longer she talked, the clearer the shape of the thing got.
"You are. You always were." She sipped her wine. "I said to Diane just last week, I said, whatever else, Cal's reliable. You can always count on Cal to keep his head down and pitch in. Not every man would, in your position."
What position is that? I said.
"Oh, you know." She smiled and didn't say. "Anyway, don't go anywhere."
And she drifted off toward the wine, having delivered exactly what she'd come to deliver, which was the word around. Near the family, not of it. Around. Kept. I had been at that lake before Lorna ever saw it. I had carried her casserole dishes to her car at 4 separate funerals. As for liking to be where the warmth is, I'd built the warmth. And she had just told me, with 2 pats and a smile, that I was something the family was generous to tolerate, and to sit still where it was comfortable, and not to go anywhere. A minute later, one of Savannah's cousins, a young man in a good blazer who'd had 2 drinks more than the hour called for, drifted past my end of the table with an empty glass and stopped, looking at me the way you look at a fixture you've just noticed has a face. Trent was 3 feet away, close enough to hear. Guessed. "You're the lake guy, right? The caretaker." He held the empty glass out toward me, not unkindly, the way you'd hold it out to a passing tray. "Could you grab me another of the red, whenever you're up?" I was not up. I was sitting at a table with a place card that had my name on it. But he'd read the room exactly as the room had been arranged for him to read it, and he set the empty glass down by my plate and waited a polite beat for the help to take it. I looked at Trent. Trent had heard every word. He could have said 3 words. "That's my uncle." Instead, he gave the young man an easy grin, the host's grin, and said, "He'll take care of you, don't worry," and turned back to his conversation. So the cousin's mistake became, in one sentence, the family's official position, witnessed and confirmed by the groom. I picked the glass up. It was easier than leaving it there for the table to keep looking at. My nephew put an apron in my hands and slid my place card to the kids' table in front of 40 people. "Would you have set the tray down and carried the chairs or walked out the door?" I'm asking because I genuinely don't know the right answer. I only know what I did, and I hadn't even gotten to the apron yet. The apron came at the toast. Trent stood up around 5 after the first round of drinks and before the food, when a crowd is loose enough to laugh and sober enough to remember it. He had a microphone. They'd rented a little sound system, 2 speakers on stands, and he tapped it twice, and the lawn went quiet. He looked good. I'll give him that. His father's height and his mother's smile, and Savannah looked up at him the way you want someone to look at the person they're marrying, and for about 10 seconds I felt the old thing, the uncle thing, the pride that doesn't ask permission. Then he started talking.
"Thank you, everybody, for being here. This place means everything to me," he said. "This lake, this house, this is Caldwell land. My grandfather built it, and one day it's going to be where Savannah and I raise our own little Caldwells."
A ripple of warmth from the crowd. Savannah's mother pressed a hand to her chest. Mr. Rhodes nodded slowly, the nod of a man confirming a purchase.
"And I want to thank everybody who pitched in to make tonight happen," Trent went on. "The caterers, who are amazing. Savannah's parents, who flew in. And he found me at the kids' table, and his smile widened, and I knew, the way you know a wave is going to break before it does, that whatever came next had been written down somewhere in advance. And of course, Uncle Cal. Where's Cal? There he is. Folks, every family needs somebody to carry the chairs, right?
The laugh that got was the worst sound I heard that night. Not cruel, exactly. Easy. 40 people laughing the easy laugh of people who've decided, without deciding, that the joke is a fair one.
No, Cal's the best, Trent said, riding the laugh. He's been coming out here forever. He likes being near the family, you know? He showed up for the open bar. More laughter. He's not really one of us. He just likes being near us. Love you, Cal.
And then, this is the part people don't believe, so I'll just tell it flat. A young man from the catering staff walked across the lawn with an apron folded over his arm and a tray in his hand, sent by someone, and held them out to me, in front of everyone, while Trent watched over the microphone with that smile.
Make yourself useful, Uncle Cal, he said into the mic. Light as anything. Drinks are getting low at table 3.
I looked at the apron. I looked at my brother's son. Here is the one thing I'll ask you to take on faith about me. I was not afraid of him, and I was not too proud to fight. This just wasn't the room for it. 40 people on the lawn, a young woman in a white dress whose whole future was being measured in front of her parents, a microphone, and a man at the front of it who wanted, more than anything, for me to make noise. He'd built the moment to have a noise in it. My noise. The bitter old hanger-on who finally lost it and couldn't take a joke. That was the part written for me, and the apron was the cue. So I didn't take the cue. I took the apron. I set my tray down on the kids' table, tied the apron behind my back the way I've tied 100 aprons at 100 family cookouts, carried 2 bottles to table 3, and poured. The catering boy fell in beside me, red to the ears. Waiter. Sir, you don't have to. I'm so sorry. I'll do that. You shouldn't be doing that. It's all right, son, I said. I know where everything is. And that was true, in a way the boy couldn't have understood. Marcus, 3 chairs down, had gone very still, the kind of still a man goes when he's deciding something. Trent moved on to the next thank you, satisfied, because in his version of the night, he'd just shown the bride's family who was Caldwell and who was furniture. And the furniture had behaved. He caught me by the bar a little later, the toast done and the crowd broken back into knots. He had a fresh drink and the loose, warm look of a man whose night is going exactly the way he planned it, and he put an arm around my shoulders like we were old friends.
You're not mad, are you? He said. Not a question, a test. Come on, Uncle Cal, it's a roast. Everybody loves you.
Nobody's mad, I said.
Good, because Savannah's people, you know how it is. They're a certain kind of people. I just need tonight to go a certain way. He squeezed my shoulder. You get it. You've always gotten it.
I get it, I said. You're selling them the lake. Something moved behind his eyes fast and was gone. He laughed.
I'm not selling anything. It's mine. Grandpa left it to me. He said it easily. The way you say a thing you've said so many times it's worn a groove. I'm just letting them see what kind of family they're marrying into. Land, you know. Roots. That's all they care about. People like that.
And what kind of family is that? I said.
The kind that owns the lake, Uncle Cal. He smiled, and it was a kind smile, which was somehow worse. Look, do me a favor tonight. Don't go telling anybody your stories about the old days, the cot, the dock, all that. It makes it sound like, I don't know, like you live here, like you've got nowhere else. It's a little sad, and Savannah's mom's a worrier. Just keep it light, for me.
I looked at my brother's son for a moment. He was asking me, to my face, with his arm around my shoulders, to not mention the 30 years, to erase myself on purpose so his story would hold. Sure, I said, I'll keep it light. One thing, I said before he could go, you change the locks out here? He stopped. For just a second the warm look slipped, and underneath it was something tight and quick and afraid.
Why would I change the locks? He said.
I'm asking.
It's my house, Uncle Cal. If I change the locks, it's because it's my house. The smile came back, but it came back slower. You got a key that's not working, you let me know. I'll get you a new one. He clapped my back. That's my guy.
And he was gone into the crowd, and he never once thought to wonder why a man he'd just asked to disappear was so easy about agreeing to it, or why that man had asked about the locks at all. What he didn't know What nobody on that lawn knew was that I was doing math. Not angry math, patient math. I poured at table 3 and thought about a thing my father told me long ago, at the kitchen table in that same house, the lake going dark in the window. I won't tell you yet what he said. It ended with a name, a number, and one instruction, and for 30 years I'd carried that name the way I carried the green tackle box, out to the boat every morning, never opened, because I'd never needed to. Would you have carried a name for 30 years and never once used it? I had. I was about to find out what it was for. The party went on. They served the food. Somebody put up a slideshow, baby pictures of Trent on a screen by the arch, and Marcus drifted over and stood next to me to watch it.
You took half these, he said quietly.
More than half.
There he is with his first base. Marcus nodded at the screen. Trent, 9 years old, grinning, holding up a fish. You were holding the net, I remember. You're standing right there.
Not anymore, I said. They'd cropped the photo down to the boy and the fish. Just out of frame where my 2 hands had held the net, there was nothing now but a clean white edge.
They cut you out of it, Marcus said. He wasn't asking.
Cropped to the wrist. 40 pictures on that screen, and the only cal in any of them was a pair of hands holding a net, trimmed off at the wrist, and not one soul on that lawn, but Marcus and me knew the hands were mine. That was when Diane found me. Diane is Trent's mother, my brother's widow. A small, composed woman with gray hair cut sharp, a soft voice, and a way of arriving at your elbow without your having seen her cross the room. People at the lake love her. She brings deviled eggs in a covered dish, remembers everyone's surgeries, and has, for 15 years, played the gentle grieving mother so well that I'd half forgotten she was ever anything else. She put her hand on my arm by the dessert table, looked up at me with damp, kind eyes, and said the kindest, most surgically chosen thing anyone said to me all night.
"Thank you for being such a good sport, Cal," she said. "You know how Trent is. He gets carried away. He doesn't mean anything by it. He loves you. You're like a father to him, you know that."
He's got a funny way of showing it, I said. It was the closest I came all night to saying the real thing out loud.
"Oh, don't," she said it gently, the word landing soft as a hand over a mouth. "Don't do that, Cal, not tonight. He's nervous. Savannah's family is a lot, and he's trying so hard to give them something to be impressed by. The last thing he needs is—" She paused, choosing the word, the way you'd choose a knife by its weight, friction, from the people who love him.
I'm not friction, I said.
"I know you're not. You never have been. That's exactly what I'm saying." She squeezed my arm and looked up at me with those damp, kind eyes. "You've always been the one we could count on, not to make it about you. Every funeral, every hard year, every time this family was a mess, you were the one who just quietly held it together and never asked for the credit. That's who you are. It would just break his heart if you stopped being that tonight, of all nights, after everything you've done for us."
At the time, it landed like comfort, and it took me weeks to understand it for what it was. You've always been the one we could count on not to make it about you. That is not a thank you. That is an instruction, dressed as a thank you, from the one person in that family I'd never have suspected of dressing anything. She wasn't comforting me. She was loading me. "Don't worry about me," I told her. "I'm not going to ruin his night."
"I know you won't," she smiled. "You're a good man, Cal, the best of them. You always were the best of them."
"Diane," I said, "did Trent ever talk to you about the lake? About what happens to it?" Just for a second, the kindness in her face held a half beat too long, the way a held note tells you the singer's run out of breath.
"The lake's all settled, Cal," she said. Walt took care of all that years ago. You don't need to worry about the lake. You never did.
I smiled back. I meant it when I told her not to worry. That's the part that still gets me. I meant it. And she patted my arm and floated off toward the head table where her golden son was holding court. And I went back to the kitchen door and sat down at the children's table, and I let it be about Trent. The way I always had. The way she'd just made sure, with 2 minutes and a hand on my arm, that I would. I told you Marcus was deciding something. He decided it around 8, after dark, when the strings of lights I'd hung were the only thing holding the lawn together, and the band, 2 guys with a guitar and a drum machine, had people up and swaying. He sat down in the kid-sized chair next to mine, handed me a beer without asking, and for a while we just watched.
He's been telling people the lake's his, Marcus said finally.
I didn't move. His.
Grandpa left it to him. That's the story. Grandpa left me the lake to keep it in real Caldwell hands. Marcus said it in Trent's voice, and it was an ugly little impression, and he knew it. He's been saying it for months. To the cousins. To Savannah's dad. That's half of what tonight is, Uncle Cal. He's selling them a legacy estate. The Caldwell Lake. The thing he's gonna inherit.
I turned the beer in my hands. Grandpa's been gone 2 years.
I know.
And nobody's read me a will that says any such thing.
I know, Marcus said again, lower. There's more and I don't. Look, I changed a tire for him last month out at the house and the locks were different. The locks on the lake house. He changed the locks, Cal. Didn't tell you?
He had not told me. I had a key to that house on my own ring, worn smooth, and in 30 years it had never once occurred to me it could stop working, because it had never occurred to me the house could stop being partly mine to walk into. I felt the first real cold of the night, and it wasn't the cold of being insulted. The apron was an insult. The place card was an insult. A man can carry an insult to his car and drive home with it. This was something else. The cold of a man realizing late that while he'd been lifting docks and hanging lights, somebody had been quietly changing the locks and circulating a story about him to people who'd never check it.
There's paper, Marcus said. He's got people signing something. An estate transfer. He's calling it. He had Lorna sign it, and the cousins from Dayton. A sign-off like agreeing the lake goes to him. He didn't ask you to sign anything, did he?
No, I said, he didn't ask me.
No, of course he didn't ask you. And there it was again, the thing in his voice, the thing that had been in his shoulders that afternoon on the dock.
Why, of course, I said.
Because you're the one who'd never make him explain it. He turned the beer in his hands. Think about it, Cal. He didn't go to me. He didn't go to the lawyer cousins. He went around getting Lorna and the Dayton people to sign a paper. But the one man who's been out here every weekend for 30 years, the one whose name maybe ought to be somewhere on something. You, he just doesn't mention. He picked the people who'd nod and the one person who'd never push. Marcus shook his head. The rest of us would have asked to read it. You'd have signed it because he handed it to you and you love him. That's why it's you.
Maybe there's nothing to read, I said. Maybe it really is his.
Then why change the locks? Marcus said, and that was the questions that sat there in the dark between us, because there was no good answer to it. You don't change the locks on a house that's already, cleanly, yours. You change the locks on a house you're worried somebody can still walk into. He's scared of something, Cal. I've watched him my whole life. He's not scared of you being mad. He's scared of you having a key. He let that land. He's the brother who got everything, and I'm the one who set up his chairs. So believe me, I'm not crying for the guy. But I know what scared looks like on him, and he's scared.
They called my father's tackle box junk Uncle Cal hauls around. The whole night, while a microphone called me furniture and a place card called me a child and a slideshow cropped me off at the wrist, I had no idea that the answer to every bit of it was folded inside that battered green box, sitting out on the boat seat in the dark, where I'd set it that morning. What's the one thing in your family everybody calls junk? I didn't go look in the box that night. The version of this where the clever uncle marches down to the dock, produces a document, and silences the room. That's not what happened, and it's not who I am. I didn't know yet, not for certain, what was in it. I knew what my father had told me at the kitchen table. I knew the name. I knew there was a man I was supposed to call. But sitting at the kids' table with my dead brother's son selling my lake to a girl's father across the lawn, I didn't feel like a man holding a winning hand. I felt like a man who'd been robbed slowly enough that he'd helped carry the furniture out. So here's what I actually did, and it's smaller than you'd want. I finished the beer. I walked down to the dock in the dark, away from the lights and the band, and I put my hand on the green tackle box on the boat seat. Didn't open it, just put my hand on it, the way you do to be sure a thing is still there, and I took out my phone. My father told me to call one man only if someone ever said I wasn't a Caldwell. Would you have carried that name around for 30 years and never used it like I did? I had the number in an old paper address book in the truck, because my father didn't trust phones, and neither, it turns out, do I. I'd copied it once, years ago, from a card he handed me at that kitchen table, folded once, soft at the creases now, a name and a number and 3 words underneath in my father's blocky hand. I read the name by the light of my phone, and my hand was steady, which surprised me as much as anything. I called him from that dock. The party was still going behind me, the band too loud, the man on the card an old lawyer an hour off who I half expected wouldn't remember handing my father a card a decade gone. There's no drama in the picture itself. An old man in an apron standing in the dark with a phone to his ear while a wedding warmed up 40 yards away. But I want it on the record, because of how this whole thing ends, that the first real move I made was not a shout and not a fist. It was a man putting his hand on a battered box in the dark, reading a name off a folded card, and deciding, not in anger, in something quieter and harder than anger, to dial it before he could talk himself out of it. I went back up to the lawn. I did not make a scene. There were chairs that had drifted out of line during the toasts, and I carried a few of the spare ones back down toward the boathouse, the way I always did, because somebody had to, and because I was the one who knew where they went. Marcus came down to help. 2 of the good white chairs apiece, the 2 men the family had filed under furniture moving the furniture in the dark, while the band took a break and the party went on without us up the slope. At the boathouse door, Marcus stopped with 2 chairs under his arm and looked at me, and I thought he was going to say something about Trent, or the locks, or the paper.
I kept the photos, he said instead.
What photos?
From Grandpa, the last couple years. He set the chairs down. On my phone, in a folder, the calendar, when stuff happened, when he got sick, when he got worse. Marcus stopped and stood there empty-handed in the dark, like a man who'd just heard himself out loud. When the funeral was, I've got the exact date, all of it.
Why are you telling me this? I said.
I don't know. He looked at the water. I just figured, somebody waving a paper around about Grandpa, somebody should know what day things actually happened. In case the paper says different. He shrugged. Trent doesn't know I kept any of it. He never thinks I'm paying attention. Nobody does.
I'm paying attention, I said.
Yeah, something eased in his face. I figured you might be.
I didn't understand that night why a folder of dates on a phone would matter. I do now. But Marcus didn't either. He just knew, the way you know to keep a receipt before you know what for, that the dates of things were worth holding on to, and that the man who'd just been handed an apron was the right man to mention it to. We left the spare chairs stacked inside the boathouse door, and Marcus went back up to the lights, and I stood a minute longer on the dock with Marcus's voice in my head saying, "I've got the exact date." Not knowing yet how much that sentence would come to matter, only certain, the way you're certain of a knot you've tied 1,000 times, that I'd done the one thing my father had told me to do, and that the rest of the night now belonged to a quiet man, an hour up the road, who had said he was already putting on his coat. And that is where I have to slow the night down for you, because everything that came after the call changed the shape of everything before it. Every chair, every pat on the shoulder, every gentle word from Diane at the dessert table. The man on the other end of that line hadn't needed me to explain myself. He'd answered before I gave my name, the way a man answers a phone he's been keeping warm for years, and he'd told me to keep my father's box close, to keep my face still, and to carry the chairs and wait. He was already reaching for his coat. So I walked back up the slope to a party that thought I was furniture, and I took my place by the kitchen door, and I waited for a quiet man in a gray coat to drive the hour out to the lake and walk through that door with a folder. I did not yet know everything that folder held, but I knew the one thing the whole golden room had decided to forget. And I knew that before the band packed up, every person at that table was going to be reminded whose name is really on the deed to the lake. The chair by the kitchen door has a short leg. I know that because I built it. I was the one who, 15 years back, drove a folded matchbook under the front right foot so it would stop rocking. And there I was, 63 years old, sitting in it again, the matchbook still doing its quiet work while my nephew laughed somewhere out by the water. A waiter, a real one, hired for the night, asked me if I needed anything. I told him no. I had everything I needed. I had a tray I'd set down, a stack of folding chairs I'd carried, and the name my father gave me to call. I want to be fair to that room because being fair to it is the only way to make you understand what came next. None of those 40 people were monsters. They were comfortable. They had watched Trent grow up handsome and easy, watched him learn to make a table laugh, and somewhere in those years they had quietly agreed that the boy who could make a toast must be the boy who mattered. I was the uncle in the corner who fixed the dock. You don't put the man who fixes the dock on the family photo. You put him near the dock. So when Aunt Lorna had slid my place card down to the kids' table earlier, not cruelly, you understand, with a little apologetic smile, the way you'd move a folding chair out of a doorway, nobody at the long table even paused their forks. Lorna leaned toward the bride's mother and said the line that had followed me around for 30 years, the line that was supposed to explain me.
He just likes being near us. He's harmless. He's been hanging around the lake forever.
Hanging around. Like weather. Like a smell off the water that you stop noticing by July. The bride's mother nodded. Because what else do you do when a woman in pearls tells you a man is harmless? And the bride's father, Mr. Rhodes, gave me the small upward chin nod that important men give to the help when they want to be seen being kind to the help. I gave it back. I am very good at giving it back. My father told me to call one man only if someone ever said I wasn't a Caldwell. Would you have carried that name around for 30 years and never used it like I did? Because I'll tell you the truth. Sitting in that short-legged chair, I almost didn't. There is a kind of tired that is older than anger. I had reached it. I thought, let them have the toast and the lake and the legacy and the lie. I'm an old man. I have a cot and a tackle box and a boat that needs bailing. Let them have the rest. Then Marcus sat down next to me. Marcus is Trent's younger brother, and if you want to know the whole shape of that family in one image, it is this. The night of the engagement party, the two Caldwells assigned to set up the folding chairs were the 63-year-old uncle and the 28-year-old brother of the groom. They put us on chairs together. That was not an accident. In that family, Marcus and I were the same kind of furniture. He had a beer he wasn't drinking, and he turned the bottle in a slow circle on his knee. For a while, he didn't say anything. Then, not looking at me, low enough that it stayed between us.
I set up 40 chairs tonight. He counted them twice to make sure I didn't skip any.
I said, I carried them in from the shed. He counted those too.
I know. I watched him hand you the apron, Uncle Cal. He turned the bottle another quarter. I keep waiting for somebody at that table to think it's strange. Nobody thinks it's strange.
People see what they've already decided to see, I told him. I meant it small, the way you say a thing to a kid who's been stung. Marcus took it somewhere I didn't expect.
Then maybe somebody should change what they've decided.
That's a lot of work, changing a whole room's mind. Most men don't have the stomach for it.
Maybe most men weren't handed an apron in front of their dead grandfather's lake. He finally looked at me, and there was something flat and old in his face that I recognized, because I'd been wearing it for 30 years. You knew Grandpa better than any of them. You slept out here. You know what he actually wanted for this place. So why are you the one in the apron?
It was a fair question. It was, in fact, the only question. I didn't answer it the honest way. Because the man who could have told the room different is dead, I said. And dead men don't talk.
No, Marcus said. They write things down. Grandpa wrote everything down. You taught me that. You said the man kept a receipt for a 40-cent fishing license. He set the bottle on the floor between his boots, deliberate, like he was setting down the part of the night where he pretended not to care. Where'd all that paper go, Uncle Cal? A man like that doesn't just leave the lake to whoever makes the best toast.
And there it was. The first crack in the night. Not from the head of the table, but from the chair next to mine, from the other piece of furniture. I did not answer him with the deed. I did not answer him with my father's instruction, or the man in the gray coat, or the box. You don't hand a loaded thing to someone before you know which way they're pointed. So I gave him the smallest true thing I had. Walt wanted the lake to stay the lake, I said. That's all he ever wanted. He didn't care whose name was on it as long as the name belonged to somebody who'd bail the boat and pay the back taxes and keep the launch open for the town kids in summer.
That's not Trent.
I didn't say it was.
You didn't have to. He almost smiled, the first almost smile of the night. Trent's never bailed a boat in his life. He's never paid a tax bill he could get somebody else to pay. He couldn't keep the launch open for one summer. He glanced at the windows, at his brother glowing under the lights. So if Grandpa really wanted the lake kept by somebody who'd keep it, and you're saying that's all he ever wanted, then explain to me how it ended up with the one Caldwell who's never kept anything.
I can't, I said. That's a good question for whoever wrote the paper.
Yeah, Marcus said slowly. It is.
Marcus looked at me for a long second, and then he nodded, like a man filing something away for later, and picked his bottle back up. But he didn't drink it. He just held it, and I understood that I had, without meaning to, pointed him somewhere. Not at the deed, not yet, but at the idea that a deed existed and that it might not say what everyone in that room had agreed it said. What I didn't say out loud was the rest of it, that my father, Walt Caldwell, sat me down at the kitchen table inside that lake house, the kitchen door I was now stationed beside like a coat rack, and pressed a sealed envelope into my hands. I was 40-something then. He was already getting thin in the way men get thin when the road's getting short, though neither of us said so. He told me not to open it. He told me to keep the name inside it the way you keep a spare key. Out of sight, never used, right up until the one day you're locked out. Call him, Walt said. Only if anybody ever stands up in this house and tells you you're not a Caldwell. I asked him who would ever do that. My father looked at the water for a long time. Then he said, "You'd be surprised who decides they own a thing once the man who built it stops watching. I carried that envelope for years and never opened it. I didn't need to. I knew the name. I'd known it since I was a boy. Mr. Okafor. The clan, when they thought of him at all, thought of him as the old man who did Dad's papers. That was the whole of their interest. To them he was a filing cabinet with a pulse, a relic from the years when Walt still ran things, somebody you'd find at a funeral and then forget by the parking lot. They did not know, could not have imagined, that Walt and Okafor had spent 19 years building something very quiet and very exact, and that the quiet, exact thing had my name in it. 'it. 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 Because the staging is the whole story. Inside, under string lights, Trent was lifting a champagne flute, and the room was lifting theirs. Out on the dark dock, where the only light was the one bulb over the boathouse, and the only sound was water knocking the pilings. An old man in an apron stood with a phone to his ear, and on the other end, a calm voice answered on the second ring, like he'd been sitting by that phone for 19 years, waiting for it to be tonight.
Caldwell residence. Is this Cal?
It threw me. I hadn't said my name.
Your father gave me this number a long time ago and told me only one person would ever use it. So, somebody stood up in the house and told you you're not a Caldwell.
More or less, I said. There's an apron involved. There was a pause on the line, and then Okafor laughed. One short, dry breath of a laugh, the laugh of a man who has waited a very long time for a thing he hoped would never come, and is, in some small way, glad the waiting is over.
An apron. Of course there is. A drawer slid open somewhere on his end. Cal, I'm going to ask you 3 things, and then I'm going to put on my coat. First, do you still have the box?
I have the box, I said. The tackle box. Walt's battered tackle box, scuffed at every corner, the latch held with a twist of wire, the box Trent had pointed at not 2 hours earlier and called the junk Uncle Cal hauls around. It was, at that moment, sitting in the bed of my truck under a tarp where it always rode. Nobody had ever once asked to look inside it. Why would they? It was junk.
Good. Don't open it. Don't show it to anyone. Second, is there a transfer being talked about? A deed, a paper, something that says the lake went to one of them?
There is, I said. My nephew's been telling the whole family for months that Grandpa left him the lake. He calls it keeping it in real Caldwell hands. There's a sign-off going around, an estate transfer, he calls it. People have signed it. Cousins, mostly. He had it at Thanksgiving.
Had it at Thanksgiving. Did anyone sign it at Thanksgiving?
Lorna did. A couple of the cousins.
And nobody thought to ask him for the recorded deed it was supposedly transferring.
Nobody asks Trent for paper. Trent is the paper, far as that family's concerned. I shifted the phone. There's more. The locks on the lake house got changed in the spring. New deadbolt. I had to ask the Petersons next door to let me in to get my own gear out of the shed. I heard Okafor stop writing.
Changed in the spring. You're certain about the spring?
I'm certain. I broke a thumbnail on the new deadbolt.
All right. His voice had gone very even, the evenness of a man laying a level across a board and watching the bubble drift. Third thing, and then I'm coming. Has anyone shown you that transfer? Have you held it in your hands and read the date on it?
No, I said. Nobody shows the paperwork.
Good. Keep it that way.
You don't want me to see my own nephew's deed?
Cal, I want you to listen to me carefully, because this is the part people always get wrong. His voice had dropped to that low, flat register a man uses when he's reading instructions off a page he's read 100 times. A man holding a forged paper is dangerous to you only while he thinks it's working. The second he thinks it's been seen, the second he thinks somebody's onto the date, he runs to a desk and starts fixing it. He gets a new notary. He backfills a signature. He makes the lie tidier. You understand? Right now his paper is messy and proud, and sitting in his jacket pocket. That's where I want it, messy and proud.
So I do nothing.
You do the hardest thing there is. You stand in the apron and you let a man who robbed you toast you, and you do not let one muscle in your face tell him you've already won. A pause. Can you do that?
I've been doing it for 30 years, I said. Tonight's just the first night it pays.
Then don't ask to see the transfer. Let it stay in his hands. I'd rather he bring it to the party than I bring it from my office. A long breath. What's the address out there now? They renumbered the Lake Road, didn't they?
I gave him the address. I told him there were 40 people and an open bar and a band that was too loud, and that his name had not been on the guest list.
Good. A man nobody invited is a man nobody's watching. Is there a table by the door, a place to set a folder down without anybody noticing it's been set down?
The gift table, I said, right by the door.
The gift table, of course. That dry breath of a laugh again. Your father would have liked that. He kept the original deed folded in his tackle box for 31 years for the same reason. Nobody searches a junk box. I'll be there inside the hour, gray coat. Don't introduce me. Don't look relieved when I come in. That's the one thing that tips a room. Carry the chairs, Cal. Let them think you're carrying the chairs. A click of a latch on his end, a coat coming off a hook. And Cal, the night your father signed his papers, you were in the room. You poured the coffee. You think that makes you a bystander. It doesn't. It makes you the witness. Hold that.
The line went dead before I could answer, which was a mercy, because I didn't have an answer. I stood on the dock a while longer. The water kept knocking the pilings. Behind me, the band finished a song and the room clapped, and through the boathouse windows I could see Trent at the center of it all, golden under the string lights, his arm around the bride, his free hand lifting that champagne flute like a man who had already won and was only now getting around to the celebration. He had no idea I was on the phone. He had no idea there was a phone to be on. To Trent, I was at the kitchen door where he'd put me, the way you leave a tool against a wall, certain it will be exactly there when you need it, and certain you won't. Here is the thing I knew on that dock that nobody inside that boathouse knew. The lake was not Trent's to leave to anyone, because the lake was already, on the original recorded deed, half mine. My father had put my name on that deed decades ago, added me as co-owner, joint tenant, the legal word for two names that own one thing together. And he had never taken it off. He did it quietly, the way he did everything. And he did it for a reason he said out loud only once, the day he signed. He wanted the lake left to the one who'd actually keep it standing. I was on that paper before Trent could spell his own name. I had been on it the whole time Trent was telling 40 people it was his. And the original, the recorded one, the one that counts, was folded inside the lure tray of the tackle box, riding under a tarp in my truck, 20 yards from where Trent was lifting his glass. A man had been telling 40 people that a thing was his, while the proof it wasn't sat folded in a box he'd laughed at. If you'd been standing on that dock with the deed in your truck and the apron still on your neck, would you have walked back in quiet, or would you have walked back in loud? Let me tell you what Trent actually believed that night, because the gap between what he believed and what was true is the whole engine of everything that came after. Trent believed the lake was his. Not hoped, believed, the way you believe the sun comes up, with no part of him left over to doubt it. In his version of the family, Walt had been a sentimental old man who loved the boy who could make a toast, and so, of course, the old man had left the crown jewel to the crown prince. The estate transfer paper Trent had been waving was, to Trent, simply the paperwork catching up to the obvious. He had told the story so many times, to relatives, to the bride, to the bride's father over a steak dinner, that it had hardened into fact in his own mouth. That is the thing about a lie you need badly enough. You stop being its author. You become its first true believer. And he needed this one very badly. I didn't know the size of it yet. That came later, with the lender and the dates. But I'd seen enough of Trent over the years to read the shape of a man living past his money. The new truck every 2 years. The watch. The way he picked up checks too fast, the way a man does when picking up the check is the only proof he can still afford anything. The engagement to Savannah Rhodes was not only a love story. Mr. Rhodes was a man with real money and a daughter he doted on, and Trent had walked into that family carrying a Caldwell legacy estate on a lake as his contribution to the merger, a generations-old property, a dock, a boathouse, a name. The bride's father had been sold a kingdom. and Trent meant to make good on the sale with a lake that was not, on the only paper that counted, his to give. So you see why the apron mattered to him. It wasn't only cruelty, though it was that. It was set design. If the bride's family ever saw me as a co-owner instead of the help, the kingdom Trent was selling would suddenly have a second king standing in it wearing an apron. He humiliated me on purpose, in front of exactly the right witnesses, to write me out of a deed he was about to need very, very much. I went back inside. I carried more chairs. The band got louder, and for the next 40 minutes, before the gray coat ever came through the door, Trent did the cruelest and the most useful thing he did all night. He performed warmth at me. It started when the bride's father drifted over to the kitchen end of the room. Bored, maybe, or just curious about the old man in the apron everyone kept gesturing toward. Trent saw it happen from across the room, and you could watch the calculation move across his face like a cloud shadow on the water. The wrong people were too close to each other. So Trent came over with that wide, easy smile, slung an arm around my shoulders, and turned us both to face Mr. Rhodes like we were posing for a photo.
This guy. You want to know who this guy is? He squeezed my shoulder. This is Uncle Cal. This man taught me everything I know about that lake. Backing a trailer, tying a cleat hitch, where the bass hide in August, all of it. He's family. He's the heart of this place, honestly.
Mr. Rhodes warmed considerably. This was a story he could use. The loyal old hand, the salt of the earth, color and texture for the kingdom he'd bought into. He shook my hand a second time, warmer than the chin nod, and said it was clear the property was in good hands. Trent beamed.
Good hands is right. I keep telling him, Uncle Cal, you'll always have a place out here. Always. As long as I've got the lake, you've got a cot and a key. He laughed. He practically came with the deed, this guy.
He practically came with the deed. I'll remember that sentence on my deathbed, and I'll still be deciding whether to laugh. Because in that one warm, generous public sentence, in front of the bride's father, Trent had done 3 things at once. He'd put himself on the deed, he'd put me beside the deed as a fixture, and he'd made the whole arrangement sound like charity. As long as I've got the lake, you've got a cot. He was offering me, with love, in front of witnesses, the thing that was already mine. Mr. Rhodes leaned in, friendly now, a man relaxing into a good purchase. How long's it been in the family, this place?
4 generations, Trent said, before I could open my mouth. My great-grandfather cleared the first lot. It comes down to me now, last man standing with the name and the sense to keep it. He clapped my shoulder. Cal here's been the caretaker most of my life. Right, Cal?
Caretaker. There's a word that does a lot of quiet work. A caretaker takes care of a thing he does not own. A caretaker can be thanked, praised, toasted, and replaced. Trent had reached past the apron and found the exact noun that turned 30 years of my life into a job description. And God help me, this is the part I'm least proud of and most certain about. I smiled and said it. Somebody's got to keep the launch open for the town kids, I said. Walt liked it open.
See? Caretaker. Salt of the earth. Trent was already turning Mr. Rhodes back toward the bar. The introduction filed and finished. I'll keep it open, Cal, don't you worry. Whatever you and Grandpa worked out, we'll honor it. Family's family.
Whatever you and Grandpa worked out. He said it the way you'd promised to water a dead man's plant. He had no idea, none, that what Walt and I had worked out was sitting in the bed of my truck in a box he'd called junk, and that the word honor coming out of his mouth was about to get a very precise and very public definition. I said, "That's kind of you, Trent," because Okafor had told me to let them think I was carrying the chairs, and a man who says that's kind of you is a man carrying chairs. I gave Trent his warm moment. I let him have it whole. I have learned over 63 years that the most patient thing you can do to a man who is digging is hand him the shovel and ask if he'd like a bigger one. The warmth went on. It got worse, which is to say it got kinder. Trent, flush with champagne and the bride's father's approval, decided to make me his good deed of the evening. He pulled me into a cluster of cousins and announced that nobody appreciates Uncle Cal enough. He told the story of the time I pulled him out of the lake when he was 6, told it well, told it with real feeling, and for a second, the boy I taught to back a trailer was actually in his face, under the man who'd handed me an apron. He raised his glass and said, "To Uncle Cal, who keeps this place running." The cousins drank to me. Lorna drank to me. I stood there in an apron and was toasted, warmly, by the people who had moved my place card to the kids' table an hour before, and I understood that I was watching the most honest, dishonest thing I had ever seen. A man so sure of his ownership that he could afford to be generous with the man he'd robbed. That toast bought Trent time, and it was meant to. It settled the room. It settled Mr. Rhodes. It put a bow on the night's one loose thread, the strange old uncle, and tied it down as a heartwarming detail instead of a question. By midnight, the story of the party would be the story of the warm Caldwells and their salt-of-the-earth uncle, and not one person under those string lights would think to ask whose name was on a single piece of paper. The detour was complete. Everyone had agreed to be fine. There was one more thing that happened during that toast, and at the time I read it as nothing, which is exactly how it was meant to be read. While the cousins drank to me, while Trent grinned and Lorna dabbed her eye, I felt a hand settle light on my forearm. Diane, Trent's mother, my late brother's widow, standing close in her good gray dress with her grief worn like a brooch. She'd barely spoken to me all night. Now she leaned in, and over the noise of the toast, she said the kindest thing anyone said to me all evening.
He loves you, Cal. He shows it badly, but he loves you. You're the last piece of his grandfather he has left. She squeezed my arm. Don't let one bad night with an apron make you a stranger. Walt wouldn't have wanted that. Whatever happens with the lake, you'll always be welcome.
You'll always be welcome. The same gift Trent had given me, in the same shape, in the same hour. I told her that was kind. She smiled, a soft, sad mother's smile, and drifted back to the edge of the room where she liked to stand, where she had stood all night. At the back, near the door, watching her son perform, her hands folded, saying very little, drawing no eyes at all. I thought she was the saddest person at the party, a widow watching her boy get engaged without his father there to see it. I felt sorry for her. I'll come back to where Diane chose to stand. Hold on to it. The back of the room near the door, hands folded, drawing no eyes. There's a reason a person learns to stand exactly there. Everyone agreed to be fine. Everyone except Marcus. I found him again out on the porch, away from the music, and he was looking at his phone with a face I didn't like, not upset, worse than upset, working something out. The band was still going behind us, muffled through the wall, and the lake was a black sheet beyond the rail with one boat light a long way out on it.
You ever notice, he said, not looking up, how Trent never actually shows anybody the deed? He shows them the sign-off, the page everybody puts their name on. But the actual deed, the recorded one, the thing with the county stamp, nobody's ever held that, including me. And I'm his brother.
Maybe it's in a drawer somewhere, I said. I was being careful. I was being so careful.
It's not in a drawer. I looked. He said it plainly, the way you confess to something you've already decided you're not ashamed of. Last spring, when he changed the locks, I went out to the lake house to get Grandpa's old toolbox before Trent boxed everything up. I went through the desk. There's no recorded deed in his name out there, Uncle Cal. There's a printout, a nice printout with Grandpa's signature on it. He finally looked at me. I took a picture of it. I take a picture of everything. You taught me that too. You said a Caldwell who doesn't keep a copy deserves what he gets.
I didn't remember teaching him that. It sounded like something Walt would have said, though, and maybe I'd just been passing it down without knowing I had it.
Here. He turned the phone to me. It was a printout, a nice one. A sheet of paper photographed flat on the lake house desk, Grandpa's name signed across the bottom. The transfer. the thing he waves around. I never got close enough to read it before he moved it back into that leather folder. But there's a date on it. He didn't read me the date. He just looked at it, his thumb hovering over it. I've been sitting with this date for a week, Uncle Cal, and I can't make it sit right. I keep thinking I've got the order of things backwards in my own head. I keep going back to when we buried Grandpa and lining it up against this and getting a number that doesn't make sense. And then I tell myself I'm wrong, that I'm a grieving idiot who can't read a calendar, and I put the phone away. And then I take it back out.
Then don't read it to me yet, I said. A date you're not sure of is a date you say wrong out loud, and once you've said it wrong, nobody hears it right after. Keep the photo. Don't lose it.
You think it means what I think it means.
I think it means we're both standing on a porch instead of inside, and that's its own kind of answer, I said. I'm not going to tell you what a date says before a man who reads dates for a living has read it. I've spent 30 years learning not to swing at a thing before I'm sure it's there. What I felt, though, and I'll be honest with you because the rest of this turns on it, was the very small, very specific click of a thing I had carried for 30 years, lining up against a thing somebody else had finally noticed too. The click of my father's voice on the dock. The click of Okafor saying, "Don't ask to see it, let it stay in his hands." Walt had told me, "You'd be surprised who decides they own a thing once the man who built it stops watching." He hadn't been guessing. He'd known there'd be a paper someday. He just never told me what the paper would say, and I wasn't going to guess it on a porch. "Marcus," I said, "one thing, that signature on the bottom. You've seen Trent's writing your whole life." And the boy frowned at his own phone like a man hearing a third footstep in a house he thought held two people, and said the thing that ended the easy part of the night. Not an answer, but a better question than I'd had the sense to ask.
That's the part I can't get past either. That's not Trent's hand on the bottom. I've watched him sign his name 1,000 times. Whoever filled this out, it wasn't him. So who's been doing Trent's writing for him?
I had carried that tackle box around for so many years that nobody in the family saw it anymore. It rode in the bed of my truck under a tarp. It sat by the back door of the lake house on a shelf I built for it. At the party, it sat where I'd set it down when Trent put the apron in my hands. On the floor by the kitchen door, next to my exile chair, a scuffed green metal box with a cracked handle and a sticker from a bait shop that closed before Trent was born. Earlier in the night, I'd heard a cousin's kid ask his mother what it was, and I'd heard her tell him, not quietly, that it was just junk Uncle Cal hauls around. She was right about the box and wrong about everything in it, because folded flat in the bottom of the lure tray, under a layer of rusted spinnerbaits and a coil of 40-pound line nobody had touched in a decade, was the one piece of paper that turned this whole night around. I'd known it was there for a long time. I want to be honest about that. I didn't find it that night like a man stumbles on treasure. My father put it there, and my father told me where it was. And for 30 years, I let it sit because a man doesn't go waving his father's papers around to win arguments at a dinner table. But somewhere around the time Trent slid my place card to the kid's table, the night stopped being an argument. I should tell you about that box before I tell you what was in it, because the family never could understand why I hauled it around, and the reason is the whole story. It was my father's, Walt Caldwell. For 30 years, he kept it on the boat seat at the lake. And for 30 years, I kept it on the cot. That's where I slept out there. A fold-up cot in the back room of the lake house, a room the size of a closet with one window that looked at the water. The family had bedrooms upstairs. I had the cot. I never minded it. I was the one who got up at 5 to bail the boat and check the dock lines after a storm, and a man who does that work sleeps closest to the door. 30 years of mornings, while the rest of them came up 2 weekends a summer and called it the family place. I kept the lake running. I didn't have a word for it then. I do now, because my father had a word for it, and he said it to me once across that kitchen table with the deed between us, and I'll get to that. So while the band tuned up and the bride's family clustered near the head table, not quite looking at me, I did a small thing. The first thing all evening that was mine to do. I drifted back toward the kitchen door at the unhurried pace of a man checking on the chairs he'd been told to set up. Nobody reads a purpose into an uncle fussing over folding chairs, and I crouched down and put my hand on the box. Marcus found me there. He was the other one they'd put to work. Trent's younger brother, 28, the quiet one, the Caldwell nobody photographs. He'd said almost nothing all evening. He'd just worked, the way I work, the way my father worked. And earlier, setting the last row of chairs beside me, he'd looked over and said low, "This is a lot of chairs for people who didn't carry one of them." It was the first true thing anybody had said to me all day. Now he crouched next to me by the box, a beer in his hand he wasn't drinking, and he watched me thumb the latch.
Uncle Cal, what are you doing down here on the floor?
"Getting something out of my junk," I said.
He shouldn't have done the apron. In front of her family. That wasn't a joke, whatever he's telling people it was.
"It's all right, Marcus."
It's not, though. You taught him to back the trailer down that dock. I watched you do it. He was 9, and you stood in the water in February so he wouldn't jackknife it.
I got the latch open. I didn't lift the tray yet. I just looked at him. This quiet nephew nobody ever set a place for either, and I decided to ask him the thing I'd been turning over since the toast. "Let me ask you something," I said. "When did the locks at the lake house get changed?" He went still. Not surprised, still. The other kind. The kind a man goes when you've named a thing he's been carrying alone.
You know about the locks.
I know I drove out 3 weeks ago to bail the rainwater out of Pop's boat like I do every spring, and my key didn't fit the door. I know I stood on the porch of a house I slept in for 30 years and couldn't get in. Trent told me it was a wiring thing, that the locksmith had to redo the whole door, that he'd get me a new key. I'm still waiting on the key.
There's no wiring thing.
I figured.
He had them changed in April. He told the family it was because of break-ins out on the lake road, which... There's never been a break-in out there, Cal. You know that. The worst thing that's ever happened on that road is a deer. He changed the locks and he didn't give you a key. He gave one to his mother, and he kept one. That's it. 2 keys.
2 keys, not mine. I lifted the lure tray out of the box. Under it, wrapped in a freezer bag gone cloudy with age, folded into a square the size of a paperback, was the deed. The original. The recorded one, with the county stamp on it, and a number inked in the corner, and my father's signature at the bottom in the hand he'd used for 60 years. Steady, unhurried, the tail on the W swinging up the way it always did. I did not unfold it all the way. I didn't have to. I'd read it enough times over the years to know what it said. And I'd known what it said since the afternoon at the kitchen table when my father slid it across to me and told me to keep it somewhere nobody else would think to look. Marcus watched me hold it.
What is that?
"It's the lake," I said. "Or the only honest record of who it belongs to. Your grandfather's name and under it mine. Co-owners. He put my name on this deed before you were born, and he never took it off." Marcus didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the freezer bag, and the stamp, and the box everyone called junk, and I watched a thing rearrange itself behind his eyes.
Trent has a deed too.
I'd heard that.
He's been showing it around for 2 months. A transfer. Grandpa to Trent, the whole lake. He's got it in a leather folder, and he showed it to my mother's whole side of the family at Easter. Said Grandpa wanted the lake to stay in real Caldwell hands and signed it over before he passed. He showed it to Savannah's father last month. That's half of why we're standing in this boathouse, Cal. Mr. Rhodes thinks his daughter's marrying into a lake.
I folded my father's deed back into its square and held it in my closed hand, and I asked Marcus the question that the whole rest of the night would turn on, though neither of us knew it yet. "This transfer of Trent's," I said, "the one with Grandpa's signature on it, do you know when it's dated?"
When it's no. Why would the date matter?
Because your grandfather signed this one, I said, lifting my closed hand an inch, before you were born. Took it downtown, put the county stamp on it, my name right under his. That's a long time for a thing to sit being true. He sat me down again years later, not for this, for another paper, at the kitchen table, with me across from him, and I know that day, too. I know what we had for lunch. And what he told me both times was the same thing. The lake was settled, it was settled the way he wanted it, and there was nothing left to sign. So if there's a second paper out there moving the whole lake to Trent, I'd like to know the day somebody says your grandfather sat down and signed it. Marcus set his beer down on the floor very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have stopped being sure of themselves.
You think it's fake?
I think a man only signs a thing once. I think your grandfather knew exactly what he owned and exactly who he wanted keeping it, and he wrote that down a long time ago in a steady hand and put a stamp on it downtown. I'm not saying anything else yet. I'm asking about a date. That's all I've got the right to do standing here. Ask about a date. That's the part I want you to hold on to because the family will tell it differently later. I didn't crack this open with a brilliant guess. I didn't have a profession that let me smell a forgery across a room. I had a paper my father gave me and a date I'd never forget. And I had a nephew who'd been treated like furniture his whole life and had finally stopped wanting to protect the people who did it. That's the whole engine. A held paper and an angry, quiet man. They called the tackle box junk Uncle Cal hauls around. The deed to the lake was folded in the lure tray the whole time. What's the one thing in your family everybody calls junk? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. The good jacket. The one his mother had no doubt picked out for him so he'd look right standing behind his brother in the photos. And he took out his phone.
I have to show you something, and once I show you, I can't take it back. So just give me a second.
Take your time.
You remember when Grandpa passed, the funeral?
I carried the front left corner.
I know you did. I was right behind you. He turned the phone in his hand without looking at it. My mother keeps a calendar. The paper kind, on the wall in the kitchen. She's done it my whole life. Writes everything on it. Doctor, church, who's hosting Thanksgiving. After Grandpa passed, I took a picture of that month. I don't even know why. Grief makes you save strange things. But it's got the funeral on it, in her handwriting, the date, circled. And it's got something else on it 3 days before the funeral. An appointment. 2 letters and a time.
What 2 letters?
He finally looked up at me. I didn't think anything of it for years, Cal. I swear to you, it's just 2 letters. But after Trent started showing that transfer deed around, I went back and I looked at the month again. And he stopped. I think you should be the one to figure out if it means what I think it means. I don't want to be the one who says it. He's my brother.
I didn't push him. A man working up to turning on his own blood is not a man you hurry. My father taught me that, sitting in that boat for hours waiting on fish that weren't biting. You don't yank the line the second you feel a tap. You let the thing decide to commit. So I let Marcus hold his phone and his terrible little piece of a calendar, and I crouched there on the floor of the boathouse with my father's deed closed in my hand. And I waited. And while I waited, I started to see the shape of it, not the proof. I want to be careful here, because the proof didn't come until later, and I'm not going to pretend I knew things I only suspected. But the shape was this. A transfer deed nobody could date in front of me. A funeral I carried the corner of. And 3 days before that funeral, in my sister-in-law's own handwriting, an appointment with 2 letters next to it. I didn't open the calendar photo that night. I didn't lay one paper beside the other. That was for later, in a quieter room, with a man who knew how to read what I could only sense. But I felt the floor of the thing shift under me the way you feel a boat settle when a second person steps in behind you, and you don't have to turn around to know the weight has changed. Marcus, I said, who handles the paperwork in your family, you and Trent? Your mother's house, the cars, all of it.
My mother does. She does all of it. Always has. Trent can't read a phone bill, Cal, you know that. He's never filled out a form in his life. If something needs signing or filing or my mother does it, she says it's because she doesn't trust anybody to do it right. He paused. Why are you asking me that?
Because Trent's been showing that deed around with his own name on it, I said. And a man who can't read a phone bill didn't draft a deed. I didn't say the rest of it. I didn't have the rest of it. Not really, not in a form I could put on a table. But I'd been around that family long enough to know who pushed Trent to the front of every room, and who hung back smiling at the rear of it, and who'd raised the golden boy and taught the quiet one to carry chairs. I looked across the floor toward the head table, past Trent holding court with his glass up, to the woman standing a little behind him in a soft gray dress with her hands folded. Diane, my late brother's widow, the grieving mother, watching her son work the room she'd dressed him for. She caught me looking. She gave me a small, sad, patient smile, the kind you give a relative you've decided to feel sorry for in public, and she turned back to her son. And something about that smile, the composure of it, the way it cost her nothing, sat wrong with me in a way I couldn't name yet. Trent was sweating in his good suit. Trent's eyes had been flicking to me all night like a man who'd left a window open in a storm. Diane wasn't sweating. Diane had folded her hands. And standing there with my father's deed against my chest, I found myself thinking about two things I hadn't thought about in years. And I want to be careful how I tell it, because at the time, they were nothing. Just two old soft spots in my memory that had never quite healed flat. The first was the back lot. There was a small piece of land my father owned up the road from the lake, a couple of acres of scrub he always meant to put a cabin on, and a few years before he passed, the family stopped talking about it. Just stopped. One Thanksgiving it was Walt's back lot, and the next it wasn't, and when I asked, somebody said Diane had it handled now, the taxes and all, and that was easier on Grandpa, and I'd nodded because it sounded like a kindness. The second was the boat. My father had a second boat, the good aluminum one, and somewhere in those same years the title to it quietly became Trent's, a graduation gift, everyone said, Grandpa being generous with the golden boy, and I'd thought nothing of it because Walt was generous and Trent was the favorite, and that was just the weather of that family. Two small things, a back lot and a boat, gone soft and changed hands in the quiet years, always with a reason that sounded like care, always handled by the same patient pair of hands. I'm not telling you I solved anything standing there. I didn't. I had no proof of one thing, and a man with no proof keeps his mouth shut. But the lake was supposed to be the first time the family ever fought over what belonged to whom. And standing in that boathouse watching Diane fold her hands, I felt the cold suspicion that it might not be the first time at all. Only the biggest. Marcus followed my eyes to his mother, and then he looked away from her fast, the way you look away from a thing you're not ready to have seen.
Don't, he said quietly. Not her. Trent did this. Trent's the one with the debt. Trent's the one who needs the bride's family. Trent changed the locks. Leave my mother out of it.
I'm not putting anyone anywhere, Marcus. I asked you who fills out the forms. You told me.
She lost my dad, Cal. She's been alone a long time. She's not. He stopped because he'd hurt himself, and a man as honest as Marcus can't finish a sentence he's already decided is a wall he's building. I don't want it to be her.
I know you don't, I said. Nobody wants it to be the one who fed them. Put the phone away. We're not doing it here. And I meant it. The boathouse floor, with the band warming up and 40 guests 40 feet away, was no place to lay out the worst thing a family can learn about itself. So I helped Marcus to his feet, and I set the lure tray back in the box, and I slid the box back against the wall by my exile chair where it had sat all night looking like nothing. But I'd seen enough by then to know two things I hadn't known an hour before. The first was that Trent's deed had a date on it, and a date is a thing that either matches the truth or it doesn't, and somebody in that family had been very careful never to say it out loud. The second was that the hand that fills out a family's forms is the hand that knows where every line goes. and that hand belonged to a woman who'd just smiled at me like she had all the time in the world. Marcus stood there rubbing his thumb across the dark screen of his phone like he could erase what was on it.
"If this is what I think it is," he said, "then I've been carrying chairs for him my whole life. We both have, you and me. And the whole time," he shook his head, "the whole time it was never even his."
"We're not there yet," I said. "Don't run ahead of what you can hold in your hand."
"And then what?"
"And then the thing does its own work, and you don't have to yank it. Your grandfather taught me that in a boat. I'll get you out on the water sometime and bore you with the rest of it." He almost smiled at that. Almost. Then his eyes went past my shoulder, and the smile died. Because Trent was crossing the floor toward us with 2 beers in his hand and the warm public face on, the one he used when the room was watching, and he'd seen his brother and his uncle crouched together by the kitchen door over a box of junk, talking low, and a man with something to hide can read a huddle from across a room. "What's the conference?" Trent said, handing Marcus a beer Marcus didn't want and not offering me one. He looked down at the tackle box and nudged it with the toe of his rented shoe. "You showing Uncle Cal your tackle, Marcus? He's got a whole museum in there. 50 years of busted lures and not one fish to show for it."
Seriously, Cal, you carried that thing into my engagement party? People are going to think the caterer brought their gear in the wrong door.
"Your grandfather's box," I said. "I keep it for him."
Right, Grandpa's box, the famous box. He smiled at the room, at the few guests close enough to hear, performing it the way he performed everything. "You know my uncle slept on a cot out at the lake for 30 years guarding a tackle box? Tell them, Cal. Tell them about the cot."
A couple of the bride's cousins laughed. The uncertain laugh of people who can tell a man's being made small but can't tell why. I didn't answer the cot. I've found that the thing a cruel man most wants is for you to defend the small life he's pointing at, so that defending it becomes the whole conversation. I just looked at him, level, and I asked him a question instead. "Trent," I said, "the transfer you've been showing people, the one with your name on it." I kept my voice easy, a man making conversation at a party. "What's the date on it?" It was nothing. It was a clerk's question. But I watched it land on him the way a stone lands in still water, and for half a second, just half, the warm face thinned, and his eyes went to the head table where his mother stood, fast, the way a boy's eyes go to the adult who told him what to say.
"Why are you asking me about a date?"
"I like to know when things happened, family history. When did Grandpa sign it over to you?"
"Before he passed, obviously. What kind of question is that?"
"How long before?"
"I don't. What does it matter, Cal? He signed it. It's signed. It's got his name on it." The warm face was gone now, just for the two of us. The room still seeing the smile, but his eyes flat and working. "You really want to do this at my party? In front of Savannah's family? You want to be the bitter old man arguing about a dead man's signature at an engagement party? Because that's the man they'll remember you as. Carry the chairs, Cal. That's what you're good at."
And there it was. He'd circled all the way back to the chairs, because the chairs were the only weapon he was sure of, and a man reaches for the sure weapon when you've shown him the question he can't answer. "I carried the chairs," I said. "You're welcome to them." He held my eyes a second longer than he meant to. Then he clapped me on the shoulder for the benefit of the room, hard, the public gesture, and he said loud enough to carry, "He's all right, my uncle. He just likes being near the family." And he steered Marcus away by the elbow toward the bar, talking fast and low into his ear the whole way. I watched them go. And I watched something I don't think Trent meant me to see. I watched him steer his brother not to the bar but past it, to the back corner where their mother stood, and I watched the 3 of them close into a small triangle with their backs half to the room, and I watched Diane put one hand on Trent's arm and say something short, and I watched Trent stop talking. Just like that. A boy who never stopped talking stopped because the hand on his arm told him to. The face out front had been performing cruelty all night, but the hand that quieted him with one touch had never raised its voice once. I sat down in my exile chair by the kitchen door, the box at my feet, My father's deed folded in my breast pocket now where I could feel the corner of it against my chest. And I did the thing my father taught me to do in a boat, when the water goes still, and you know the fish is down there deciding. I waited. And across the floor, Marcus broke away from the triangle, his face the color of a man who's just been told a thing in his ear he can't put back, and he came and stood near the wall, alone, not looking at his mother, not looking at his brother, looking at the floor. I knew that look. I'd worn it myself once, a long time ago, when I first understood that the family I'd given my life to had a version of me they preferred to the real one. Marcus had just heard whatever his mother said into his brother's ear, or read it off the way the triangle closed, and some last hope of his had gone out. It took him 20 minutes to cross the room to me. 20 minutes, a man traveling the length of a boathouse and his whole childhood at the same time. He sat down in the empty folding chair beside my exile chair, the kids' table, the place nobody else would sit. And for a while he didn't say anything. Then he took out his phone again and didn't turn it on.
She told him not to talk to you, he said, just now. She told him you don't have anything. You've never had anything. You're a sad old man who carries a box around, and the worst thing he can do is act like your questions matter. She said it like she'd practiced it. He turned the dark phone over in his hands. She had it ready, Cal. That's the part. She had the whole speech ready for the night you finally asked about the date. Who has a speech ready for a question nobody's supposed to know to ask?
Somebody who knows the answer is dangerous, I said.
Yeah, he let out a breath. Yeah.
You want to tell me about the 2 letters on the calendar now? He was quiet a long moment. Then he made the choice. I saw him make it. The way you see the boat finally tip its weight off the dock and commit to the water, no taking it back.
Not here, he said. Not in front of her. But I'm done, Cal. I'm done carrying the chairs and pretending I didn't see what I saw. Whatever you're going to do, and I think you've got more in that pocket than you're letting on. I want to be on the right side of it. Tell me what you need.
I almost told him everything then. I almost took the deed out of my pocket and laid it across both our knees and told him about the trust and the man my father told me to call, and the sealed instruction. But I didn't, because there was one person who had a right to surface those papers before I did, one man who'd held the real weight of it for years while I held only the copy in the box. And the smartest thing I could do for Marcus, and for my father, and for the truth, was nothing yet but wait. So I told him the only thing I'd allow myself to say out loud in that room. I need you to keep that calendar photo somewhere safe, I said. And the changed lock receipt, if you can get it. Your mother kept the locksmith's invoice. A woman who files everything keeps the invoice. And then I need you to do the hardest thing there is. I need you to stand next to me at the kids' table and look like nothing's happening. Can you do that?
For how long?
Not long, I said. There's a man supposed to come tonight. My father told me about him a long time ago. Quiet man, gray coat, does Grandpa's papers. I looked toward the lobby doors at the far end of the boathouse, where the night was getting dark outside the glass. I made a call this afternoon before the party. I told him what Trent had been waving around, and I told him the one thing I've never told anyone in this family. He said he'd come. He said to keep my father's box close, and not to open anything in front of the room until he got here.
Who is he?
Somebody your grandfather trusted more than he trusted his own blood, I said, which, looking around this room, I'm starting to understand. I want to tell you what was going through me while I waited, because it wasn't what you'd think. It wasn't anger. I'd burned the anger off hours earlier, somewhere between the apron and the place card, the way a fever burns off and leaves you cold and clear. And it wasn't triumph either. Not yet. Not even close, because nothing had happened. And a man who declares victory before the thing happens is a man my father had no use for. What I felt, sitting in that exile chair with my father's deed warm against my chest and Marcus gone quiet beside me, was the particular stillness of a man on a dock at the end of the day. You do the work, you set the lines, you bail the boat, you check the knots, And then there comes a point past which there's nothing left to do but sit down and let the water decide. My father taught me that. Not in words. In 30 years of evenings, the two of us on the dock, him with that battered green box on the seat between us, neither of us saying much, the lake going flat and silver as the light left it. He never once told me I was the one who'd keep it. He didn't have to. He put my name on a piece of paper and folded it in a box nobody wanted and let the paper say it for him, the way a quiet man says the biggest things. So I sat. I let the toast go on. I let Trent be the king of his own party one last time because I knew something he didn't, which was that the part that mattered had already happened, a long time ago, at a kitchen table, in a steady hand. Everything after that was just the lake deciding to go still. And as I said it, the lobby doors at the far end of the boathouse opened, and the warm noise of the party dipped for just a second the way a room dips when a stranger walks in. And a man came through them out of the dark, an older man, unhurried, in a gray coat with the collar still up against the cold off the lake. He had a slim folder under one arm. He stopped just inside the doors and let his eyes move over the room without hurry, the way a man looks for one face in a crowd of 40, and he was not on anyone's guest list, and nobody had set a place for him, and the band kept playing because the band didn't know. I knew. I knew before he found my face. This was the one my father had named for me long ago. The man to phone, he'd said, if the family ever turned around and decided I wasn't really a Caldwell. I had carried that name in my head for 30 years and never once used it until this afternoon. Marcus felt me go still beside him.
Is that him?
That's him. Across the room, Trent had his back to the doors, mid-toast again, glass raised, his mother at his shoulder, the bride's father smiling and nodding at a story about a Caldwell legacy estate. None of them saw the man in the gray coat. Only Marcus and I watched him cross the floor, not fast, not slow, finding the one low place in the room and moving toward it the way water moves through a door left open. He didn't go to Trent. He didn't go to the head table. He went to the gift table, the long table by the entrance stacked with wrapped boxes and silver envelopes and a card propped up that read, Trent and Savannah in someone's careful hand. And there, in the middle of all those wedding gifts, in front of the silver envelopes and the ribboned boxes meant to celebrate a man who'd called me the help, the man in the gray coat set his folder down flat on the table, squared it with 2 fingers so it sat straight and rested his hand on top of it. He didn't open it. He just stood there with his hand flat on the closed folder, patient, the way my father used to stand at the end of the dock at dusk, waiting for the lake to go still, and he looked across the room and found my eyes at last. And he gave me the smallest nod a man can give. The folder sat closed on the gift table, whatever my father had left in it, and I'd carried only the copy in the box, never the folder itself. None of it had been said yet. Not one page had been turned. The room still didn't know. Trent still had his glass in the air. Diane still had her hand on his arm. And the quiet man in the gray coat stood with his palm flat on the closed folder, waiting for the toast to end, before he opened a single page. The folder sat on the gift table for what felt like a long time, though it was probably 10 seconds. Okafor did not open it right away. He took off his gray coat, folded it once over the back of the chair I had carried into that room an hour earlier, and set his glasses on his nose like a man who had read worse documents in worse rooms. The band had stopped between songs. Nobody told them to start again. 40 people who had laughed when Trent handed me the apron now stood very still, holding little plates of cake, because a stranger in a gray coat had just put a folder down on the table where the wedding gifts were stacked and had not asked anyone's permission to do it. Trent came off the small stage fast. He still had the microphone in his hand, and he made the mistake of keeping it on.
Sir, I don't know who let you in, but this is a private family event. If you're here for Cal, he helps out. He's not on the list.
Okafor looked up at him over the glasses. He had a calm I have only ever seen in men who are about to be proven right and are in no hurry about it.
I'm not on the list either. I'm here because your grandfather put me here. My name is Okafor. I drew Walt Caldwell's papers for 19 years. You may know me as the old man who did your father's papers. That's accurate. I'm also the man your uncle was told to call the day anyone in this family stood up and said he didn't belong in it.
He let that sit. Then he looked at me, just once, and gave me the smallest nod, the way Walt used to nod at the dock when the knot held.
Cal called me this afternoon. I'd have come sooner. Walt asked me to wait for exactly this, for the day, not before it.
I want to tell you I felt triumphant. I did not. Not yet. I felt the cot in the back room and 30 years of bailing rain out of a boat. I felt my father's hand on the tiller. Mostly I watched the bride's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rhodes, who had been sold a Caldwell legacy estate over a rehearsal dinner, lean very slightly away from their daughter's fiancé without seeming to move at all. Okafor opened the folder.
I'm going to read 3 things, and then I'm going to read a 4th thing that I wish I didn't have to. The first is a deed, recorded, stamped by the county. This is the original instrument for the Caldwell Lake property, the house, the dock, the water frontage. It's dated 31 years ago. I'd like everyone to hear who's named on it.
He read it the way you read a grocery list, which is the only way to read a thing like that so a room believes it.
Grantee, joint tenant with right of survivorship, Walt Caldwell and Calvin Caldwell. Both names, recorded together. Never severed, never amended, never quit-claimed. In plain terms, Cal has owned half of this lake for 31 years, and no one in this room can change that by toasting around it.
Somebody's plate hit the floor near the bar. Nobody bent to pick it up. Trent laughed, but it came out wrong. Too high.
Okay, fine. Grandpa put his name on something 30 years ago. Sentimental, sure, but the property transferred. I have the transfer. It's mine. He left it to me. Everybody here knows he left it to me.
We'll get to your transfer. We will absolutely get to your transfer. Second document.
He turned a page. He did not raise his voice once the whole night, and neither did I, and I think that is the part Trent never planned for. He had a speech for a man who would shout. He had nothing for 2 men who would simply read.
This is Walt Caldwell's living trust, executed 11 years ago in my office, witnessed notarized. It governs the lake holding. It names a successor beneficiary, the person the lake passes to fully, on Walt's death. I'm going to read the name as it's written.
He read it.
Successor beneficiary of the Caldwell Lake holding. Calvin Caldwell, not the estate, not the grandchildren as a class, not Trent. Cal. There is a letter attached, in Walt's hand 4 sentences. I'll read one. I'm leaving the lake to the one who'd actually keep it standing.
I had heard those words before. Walt said them to me at the kitchen table 11 years ago, while Okafor's pen scratched and the coffee went cold, and I thought he was being kind to an old son who slept on a cot. I did not know he had written them down. I did not know he had made them true on paper. There is a particular kind of grief that arrives years late, when you find out a man loved you even more carefully than you let yourself believe. And it arrived right there, in a boathouse, in front of 40 people eating cake. Trent's face had stopped performing. That was the first honest expression I had seen on him all night.
None of this is, he was old. He didn't know what he was signing. You took advantage of an old man.
Walt anticipated you'd say that too, so he didn't only sign, he spoke. Third item. This is a recording. Walt left it with me himself the year before he passed on his own phone and asked me to keep it until the day someone in the family stood up and told Cal he wasn't one of you. He dated it. You'll hear him date it.
Okafor set a small recorder on the gift table beside the folder, beside a wrapped box with a silver bow. He pressed it with one finger, and then my father's voice came out of it into that room. It was thin, and it was older than I like to remember. and it filled the boathouse the way it used to fill the dock at 6 in the morning when he wanted the boat in the water before the fish woke up. He said the date first, slow, the way he did everything. Then he said the rest. Grandpa. This is for whoever needs to hear it. The lake goes to Cal. He's the one who kept it. He bailed it. He fixed the dock. He taught the boys. He never asked me for a dime. Whatever paper anybody waves at you, the lake goes to Cal. To... The recorder clicked off. Nobody moved. Mrs. Rhodes had a hand over her mouth, and it was not the polite version of that gesture. Somewhere behind me, a folding chair scraped. Marcus, sitting down, because his knees had gone, because he had loved Walt, too, and because the man he set up chairs beside all night had just been named in a dead man's voice in front of the people who'd called us the help. For 2 years, I had told myself that Walt naming me was a private kindness between a father and the son who didn't amount to much. Hearing him say it out loud, dated, kept on purpose for exactly this night, it wasn't a kindness. It was an instruction. He had seen the shape of this coming and left me a voice to stand on so I'd never have to raise mine. I didn't. I never had to. I want you to picture the kitchen where he made the recording, because I can. It's a small kitchen with a window over the sink that looks down the slope at the dock, and the linoleum is worn through to the black backing in front of the stove from 50 years of one man standing there at 5 in the morning making coffee in the dark. That's where he sat with his phone, an old man who never trusted a phone for anything, holding it the wrong way at first, I'd bet, and pressing the button 2 or 3 times before it took. He hated machines. He bailed a boat with a bleach jug into his 80s and called the marina's electric pumps a way to spend money being lazy. For him to sit down and figure out how to record himself, to say a date into a little glass rectangle on purpose so that some night years later a room full of strangers would have to believe him. That's not a man being sentimental. That's a man building a wall around the one thing he was afraid somebody would take. He built it out of his own voice because he knew nobody could forge that. The thing about hearing your dead father say your name in front of 40 people who spent the evening pretending you were staff is that it does not feel like winning. It feels like being seen, finally, by the only person whose seeing ever mattered, and being seen too late to thank him for it. I stood there by the kitchen door, the same kitchen door they'd seated me beside as a joke, and I did the math I'd been refusing to do for 2 years. He hadn't named me because I was the eldest, or the cleverest, or the one who'd done well. I was none of those. He named me because I was the one who showed up at 6 in the morning to bail the boat in the rain when there was no party, no audience, no glass to raise, nobody watching but him. He'd been watching the whole time. He just never said so until he was gone and a stranger in a gray coat pressed a button. Trent tried one more time and his voice cracked down the middle of it.
He gave it to me. The transfer is real. Show them. I have the deed, it's signed, Mom has a copy, ask my mother, she has it, she'll tell you.
That was the first time he reached for her. I noticed it. Okafor noticed it. I think Okafor had been waiting 19 years to watch a Caldwell reach for Diane in a moment like this, because he turned a page in the folder very deliberately and did not look at Trent at all.
Yes. Let's talk about the transfer. Bring it here.
Trent had been carrying it like a trophy for weeks. He'd waved it at relatives, told them Grandpa left the lake to him to keep it in real Caldwell hands. He had it in a leather portfolio under the gift table, and his hands shook taking it out. But he handed it over, because in his head it was still his ace. It still won. He still believed the paper. Okafor laid Trent's transfer deed flat on the table. Then he laid the recorded original right beside it, so the 2 pages touched at the edge. He smoothed them both with the flat of his hand, the way Walt smoothed a chart.
This is the document Trent's been showing people. Transfer of the Caldwell Lake property to Trent Caldwell. Signed, it says, by Walt, with Walt's W. Here's the original recorded deed, signed by Walt 31 years ago. Here's the trust, signed by Walt 11 years ago. 3 genuine signatures decades apart, an old man's hand getting older. Look at the W on all 3. Same hook on the downstroke. Same little hitch where his hand always caught.
He set Trent's transfer between them.
Now look at this W. No hook, no hitch. Steady where Walt was never steady. It's a good forgery. It's not Walt's.
A layman could see it. That was the cruelty Okafor built into it on purpose. He didn't ask the room to trust an expert. He asked 40 people holding cake to look at 3 letters and 1 letter and see for themselves which one didn't belong. They saw it. You could feel the room see it.
Handwriting changes. People sign differently when they're sick. When they're tired, that doesn't prove.
You're right, it doesn't by itself. So I won't rest it on the W, I'll rest it on the date.
And here is where I want you to slow down with me, because this is the thing that scared Trent more than the deed, more than the trust, more than his grandfather's voice. It wasn't the signature. It was the date.
The transfer deed Trent's holding is dated. Right here. I'm going to read the date out loud, and then I'm going to ask one person in this room a question. He read the date. Then he said, Marcus, when did we bury your grandfather?
Marcus stood up from the folding chair. He had the calendar photos in his phone, the ones he'd taken at the lake that whole season. Time stamped, the dock, the boat, Walt's chair empty by then. And he had the funeral date, because you do not forget the day you bury your grandfather. He said it plainly, no drama, the way Walt would have wanted it said.
We buried him on the 9th. I've got the photos. I've got the program. The lake was already closed up for the season. He'd been gone a week before that date you just read.
The transfer was signed a week after Walt was already gone. When the date doesn't match the funeral, what would you call that? The room had already named it, silently, every one of them. A dead man cannot sign a deed. The W was the lie. The date was the proof. And a 17-year-old with a calendar could have caught it. No expertise, no profession, just the funeral date held up against the form date by the other nephew they'd also made carry chairs.
There's a notary journal, Okafor went on, lifting a thin gray ledger from the folder. Every notarized signature in this state gets a line in a book. Date, name, the signer present in the room. There is no line in any journal for this transfer. There's no notary. There's no Walt. There's a date that falls a week into a grave and a W that isn't his. That document is not a deed. It's a forgery wearing one.
And here is where the last loose thread of that whole season pulled tight, and I watched Marcus feel it pull before anybody said a word, because Okafor was not finished with that gray ledger.
I said there's no journal line for this transfer, and there isn't. But a forger still has to learn the trade somewhere, and a notary's book remembers more than the notary does. There is a line. 3 days before Walt Caldwell was buried, in the book of a notary 2 counties over, far enough that nobody out here would run into him. An appointment kept. The name on it isn't Walt's, because Walt was dying. It's the name of the person who came in his place to ask a notary what the forms require. He looked at me. Cal, you were handed a photograph tonight of a wall calendar. 3 days before the funeral. 2 letters and a time.
Marcus came up off the chair. He had the calendar photo open on his phone before Okafor finished the sentence, and he turned it around so the room could see it. His mother's own hand, her own kitchen wall, the funeral circled, and 3 days before it, in the small, careful print she used for the things she didn't want forgotten, 2 letters and a time.
It's initials, Marcus said, and his voice did a thing I'd never heard it do. I've been looking at it for a year, thinking it was a doctor, a hairdresser, anything. It's the notary's initials. She wrote down the appointment on her own calendar 3 days before we buried him. While he was still warm, she was 2 counties over learning how to make the paper.
The 2 letters are his initials, Okafor said. His full name is in his journal, and his journal is in my folder. He'll remember who sat across his desk, because people who come to ask a notary how to fake a dead man's signature are not a thing a notary forgets.
It was the smallest piece of paper in the whole folder. A wall calendar, 2 letters, a time. The thing Marcus had carried for a year not knowing what it was. The thing he'd handed me on a porch and asked me to be the one to figure out, because he couldn't make himself be the one to say it. It had been on the kitchen wall the whole time, in her own hand, the way a careful person writes down the one appointment they should never have written down at all. Trent sat down. He didn't choose to. The leg of the gift table was behind him and he found it. The microphone was still in his hand, off now, useless, a prop for a part that had ended. I watched the boy I taught to back a trailer down the dock become a man holding a lie he couldn't put down. And I'll be honest with you, there was no triumph in it. He chose me. That was the part I hadn't understood until that night. Of all the uncles and cousins he could have run this through, he chose the one who loved him most because that uncle would never accuse him. He bet his whole hand on my silence. He almost won, too. I'd have carried those chairs every weekend for the rest of my life and never said a word if he'd only let me keep my own name. But Okafor wasn't finished, and what came next was the part Trent did not see coming, because Trent, God help him, still thought he was the smartest person in the room.
I want to be careful here, Okafor said, because the easy story is that Trent forged this. The easy story is wrong. Trent didn't draft this document. He's not capable of it, and I mean that as the only kind word I have for him tonight. Somebody drafted it for him, taught him to wave it, told him to make the toast and court the bride's family, and stand at the front, so that if it ever cracked, it cracked over the favorite, the face out front.
He turned finally toward the back of the room, where a composed woman in gray had been standing very still by the coat rack the entire time, not eating cake, not holding a plate, just watching her son the way a director watches a scene she wrote.
Diane, would you come up here, or should I keep reading?
Diane did not come up. Of course she didn't. She had spent 30 years never being the one who came up. She raised Trent to be the one who comes up. She had buried my brother, kept the grieving mother coat on for a decade, and run every play in this family from the back wall while the favorite took the bows. I had eaten Thanksgiving across from her for 30 years and never once seen her hand on anything. That was the whole trick. You don't see the hand that's never on the table.
I don't know what you think you're doing, but I'm a widow and a mother, and I won't be ambushed at my son's engagement party by my father-in-law's lawyer over some paperwork I've never seen.
You've seen it. You drew it.
That's a disgusting thing to say to a grieving woman. I lost my husband. Walt was my father-in-law for 30 years. How dare you stand in front of all these people and accuse me of?
I haven't accused you of anything yet. I've read 3 documents, and I'm about to read 2 more. If you've never seen the transfer, sit down and let me finish. Grieving women have nothing to fear from a man reading dates out loud.
She didn't sit down. That was the tell, if anybody in that room had been looking for one. An innocent woman sits down. An innocent woman lets the lawyer read his boring pages and waits for the part that clears her. Diane stayed on her feet at the back wall, by the coats, and her eyes never went to the documents on the table. They went to the door. She was measuring the distance to the door. I had known her for 30 years, and I had never once watched her measure a room before, because she'd never been in one she didn't already own.
Here's what I find interesting, Diane. Trent's known about this transfer for weeks. He's been waving it at the family. But when I asked him a minute ago who had a copy, who could vouch for it, the first name out of his mouth wasn't a notary. It wasn't a witness. It was yours. Ask my mother. She has it. She'll tell you. A young man caught in a lie reaches for the person who handed him the lie. That's not proof. It's just the most natural thing in the world, and it told me where to look.
He laid out 2 more pages. He'd kept them for last on purpose. A backlot deed, a title for Walt's boat, the same boat I bailed the rain out of every spring.
6 years ago, a backlot off the Caldwell Road quietly changed hands, retitled, with a W. 4 years ago, Walt's boat, the registration changed too. Same W, the good forgery, the steady one with no hook and no hitch. I didn't notice it then. Nobody did. There was no reason to look. But once you've seen the W on this transfer, you can't unsee it on those. 3 documents, 3 forged W's, all in the same hand, years apart, and every single one of them with Trent's name on the front. Never yours, Diane, never once your name. You put the boy out front every time.
Trent turned around in his chair and looked at his mother. I have replayed that look more than anything else from that night. It wasn't anger. It was a child realizing the floor was never there. He'd thought he was the prince. He found out, in front of his fiancée and her parents and 40 guests, that he was the shield, that his own mother had dressed him in the theft and stood him at the front of the room precisely so that when the folder came, the blow would land on her golden boy and not on her. She'd been willing to spend him from the start.
This is theatre. A lawyer and a sad old man putting on a show. None of it's been to a court. None of it's proven. You're standing in a boathouse, not a courtroom. And tomorrow my attorney—
Okafor told her plainly that her attorney would have copies by morning. Everything he'd read, the notary journal with no line in it, the recorded deed older than her son. Then he set the page down.
You're right that this is not a courtroom. I didn't come for a verdict. I came because Walt told Cal to call me the day someone stood up in this family and said he didn't belong. Someone stood up tonight. The court is next, and the court is slow. But the deed was already true an hour ago, when your son handed Cal an apron.
Trent, don't say anything. Trent, look at me, we're leaving.
You said he wouldn't fight it. You said Uncle Cal would never. You said he loves me too much to.
He stopped himself, but it was out. Half the room had heard it, and the Rhodes family had heard all of it, and Mr. Rhodes set his cake plate down on the gift table next to the forged deed, very quietly, and took his daughter's elbow. And that was the Caldwell Legacy estate stepping out the side door of the boathouse and into the parking lot where it belonged. Savannah didn't cry. She looked at Trent for a long second, like she was reading a date that didn't match a funeral, and then she went out after her father. I did not say anything to Diane. I want that on the record. I had 30 years of things I could have said, and I said none of them, because Okafor had already said the only thing that mattered, which was true and dated and signed by a notary who'd actually been in the room. You don't shout over a document. You let it lie there and do its quiet work. Here is what the document did, in the weeks after, and I'll give it to you plainly because the law doesn't deal in boathouse drama, and neither will I. Okafor walked the forged transfer down to the county recorder himself. The recorder logged the referral, and the bogus deed was voided and expunged off the lake property, struck from the record as if Trent had never waived it, because in the eyes of the county he never legally had. Before that, the first thing Okafor did, the very first morning, was file A. Ellie's pendens against the lake. In plain terms, a flag on the property that freezes it, so no one can borrow against it or sell it while there's a fight over who owns it. Trent had been quietly courting a lender to pledge the lake for a loan he badly needed. The flag landed before a single dime moved. The lender walked. The loan died on the table. The DA opened a forgery file. Not on Trent in the end. On Diane. The forged W traced to her hand. The backlot and the boat made it a pattern, not an accident. And a pattern is what turns a sad family quarrel into a file with a number on it. She was charged. She was barred from the estate entirely, removed as any kind of fiduciary, and ordered to disgorge, to give back, what she'd skimmed off the backlot and the boat years before. I'll be careful here, because careful is the only honest way to say it. The charges are pending, referred. A matter for a court, not for me, and not finished. No one went anywhere in handcuffs out of that boathouse. The slow machinery just started turning, the way it's supposed to, on a date that finally matched the truth. I sat in on one meeting with the DA's clerk, the day Okafor brought the backlot deed and the boat title in. I want to tell you what that room was like, because it was the opposite of the boathouse in every way, and that's exactly why it worked. No band, no cake, no 40 people. Fluorescent lights and a metal table and a young clerk who'd never met a single Caldwell and didn't care which of us was the favorite. He laid the 3 forged documents out and pulled up the recorder's scans on a screen and matched the W's the same way Okafor had, except he didn't do it to turn a room. He did it to fill out a form. And watching a stranger fill out a form about my brother's widow, plainly, without drama, was when it stopped being a family wound and became a fact with a case number. The clerk asked me one question the whole time. He pointed at the W on the boat title and said, "Did your father ever sign anything this neat?" I said no. He wrote that down. That was my entire testimony. One word, written on a line, in a building Walt never set foot in. Diane has lawyers now, good ones, and they are going to argue about that boat title and that backlot for a long time. That's how it should be. I'm not the court. I'm a 63-year-old man who bails a boat. But the Elise Pendens holds, and the trust holds, and the recorded deed has held for 31 years, and you cannot argue a dead man's voice into saying a name it didn't say. So they'll fight the pages, and the pages won't move, because that is the entire reason my father, who hated machines and trusted nobody, put everything that mattered onto pages and into a stranger's gray folder and into a recording in his own voice. He didn't leave me money. He left me something Diane's good lawyers can't redraft in the night. He left me the dates. Trent kept the forgery he was dressed in. He lost the bride's family's stake, the lender deal, and the only crown he ever wanted, which was to be the real Caldwell at the front of the room. He was left holding his mother's lie with his own name on the front of it, which is exactly where she'd put it, years before he ever raised that glass at me. The recovered money, what could be clawed back from the old skim, never came near my pocket. And I want you to know that, because Trent spent that whole night telling a room I showed up for the open bar. It cleared the back taxes on the lake first, the ones Walt had been quietly carrying so the place couldn't be lost. What was left, Okafor seeded into a small fund in Walt's name, the kind of thing Walt did his whole life and never told anybody. It keeps the public boat launch open. It pays for the kids' summer swim lessons down at the dock, the way Walt always paid for them out of his own pocket and called it nothing. I didn't decide that. Walt's papers did. I just signed where the man told me to sign the way I should have understood I was always going to. Marcus called me 4 days later. Said the spring rain had filled Walt's old boat to the gunnels again, the way it does every year, and asked if I wanted help bailing it out. I said I'd meet him at dawn. So that's where this ends. Not in the boathouse with the folder and the 40 people. At the dock, at 6 in the morning, the day the lake was legally, finally, only ours. It was cold. The water had that flat gray skin it gets before the sun reaches it. Walt's boat sat low and full of a winter's worth of rain. The same boat Diane had retitled with a steady W that wasn't his. The boat that was back on the record in Walt's name and mine where it belonged. Marcus was already there when I came down the path. He had 2 of the folding chairs over his shoulder, 2 of the same chairs Trent made me carry and set up for the people who laughed. We didn't set them up for anybody. We set them up for us. 2 chairs, down at the end of the dock, pointed at the water. Then we got down on our knees on the wet boards and bailed out Walt's boat with a coffee can and an old bleach jug cut in half, the way we'd done it every spring of our lives. The 2 Caldwells who were always handed the chairs and the buckets and told to be useful at the edge of things. You learn a person bailing a boat with them at dawn. There's no audience, no toast, no microphone. There's just the cold biting your fingers and the slosh of the water going over the side and the way a man's breath fogs when he's working and not talking. Marcus and I had bailed this exact boat 100 springs, the 2 of us, while the rest of the family slept in the warm house up the slope, and came down later for the part where the boat was already in the water and the coffee was already made. Nobody ever asked who got it ready. That was always the point. We were the ones who got it ready. Walt knew. That was the part the rest of them never understood, and the part Trent, raised by a woman who taught him that the people who get things ready are the help, was never going to understand. The boat doesn't care who you toasted. The boat cares who shows up with the can.
You knew. All those years. You knew your name was on the deed, and you let Trent run his mouth, and you carried his chairs anyway.
I didn't know about the trust, I said. I didn't know about the recording. I knew Walt put my name on the deed 31 years ago because I sat at the table when he did it. But you have to understand, a name on a deed is a thing you forget on purpose. It felt like a kindness, not a weapon. I never thought I'd have to be the kind of man who used it.
And if Okafor hadn't come, if you'd never called him,
Then I'd have carried the chairs, I said, every weekend, till I died, and Trent would have pledged the lake and lost it, and your grandfather's place would be a row of vacation rentals by now. So I called him. That's the whole heroic story. An old man made a phone call he'd been told to make for 30 years.
That's not nothing, Uncle Cal.
No, I said. I suppose it isn't.
Can I ask you something, and you won't get mad?
You can ask.
Do you wish he'd told you, while he was alive, that he made you the one, instead of leaving it in a folder for after?
I bailed 2 more cans before I answered him, because it was a fair question, and it deserved a real answer instead of a quick one. He did tell me, I said. He just told me the way he told everybody everything. He told me at 5 in the morning with a bleach jug in my hand and nobody else awake to hear it. He told me by leaving the boat for me to bail and the dock for me to fix, and never once doing it himself when I was around to do it. That was him saying it. I wanted the other kind of telling, the kind with words. But your grandfather wasn't a words man. He was a who shows up man. He put it in a folder for after because for him a folder was the only kind of words he trusted, and look, the folder's the only thing that held tonight. The words would have blown away in that boathouse like everybody else's. The folder didn't.
I'm glad it was you, he said. I want you to know that, out of all of them, I'm glad it was you.
It was both of us, I said. Pull the cord.
He really left it to you. The whole time. He left it to you and let everybody keep thinking it was Trent's.
He left it to whoever'd keep bailing it, I said. Turns out that was both of us.
She's not even sorry. Mom, you know that, right? She's going to fight every page of it.
Let her fight the pages. The pages don't change. That's the whole reason Walt used pages. We got the boat dry. Marcus pulled the cord on the old motor, and it coughed and died, and he pulled it again, and on the 3rd pull it caught and held. That ugly, faithful sound rolling out flat across the lake, the way it had every morning of my childhood and every morning of Walt's before mine. We let it idle. We didn't go anywhere. There was nowhere we needed to be that the boat couldn't already reach. I set Walt's tackle box on the boat seat, in the spot where it had ridden for 50 years, where the recorded original deed had been folded in the lure tray the whole time everyone was calling it junk. Trent thought the lake was the prize. It was the box he called junk. The chairs he made me carry are down at the dock now, 2 of them, pointed at the water, and the box rides on the seat where Walt left it. Trent didn't come to the dock, but 2 mornings after the boathouse I found an envelope weighted under a rock on the last plank. The forged transfer was inside it, the one he'd waved at 40 people. Nothing was written on the outside, just his own name in his own hand crossed out. I didn't open the envelope to check the pages. I knew what was in it. I set it in the bottom of the tackle box, under the lures, where the real deed used to live, and I let the motor go on idling. I keep the 2nd key to the lake house in the same drawer Walt kept it in. Marcus has the 1st. Neither of us has changed the locks. Diane's lawyer sends letters. Okafor answers them. The no contact holds, and the charges stand, and none of it reaches the dock at 6 in the morning. Some mornings I think about the apron, and the place card slid down to the kid's table, and the boy with the live microphone telling 40 people I just liked being near the family. I did like being near the family. That part was never the lie. The motor's still idling out there most mornings now, if you want to know. 2 chairs, 1 box, 1 lake, finally settled on paper that matches the truth. And there's 1 more envelope on its way. Okafor called last night, said the DA's office turned up a 4th document with the same steady W, and this one doesn't have Trent's name on the front at all. I haven't opened the folder yet. Who would you have charged? The face out front or the hand behind it? Tell me in the comments. I already know what I'd do. I'd read the date. Until next time.